sure. So my name's Caleb. My traditional name in English is Hummingbird. My Cree name is Amopahisis, which means tiny buzzing bird. My Coast Salish name is Swansili, and my Celtic name is Kwakanda. I'll translate into hummingbird, which means the bringer of small elements of magic. I am 40 years old, turning 41 this year, and I am a Metis-Canadian in the British Columbia citizenship of the Metis. So I have been working on my, it's not status, I was corrected and told that it is my Metis Citizenship. My Metis Citizenship has been a work in progress since I first went away to university in 2012. And it has been a lot of paperwork, and I'm just about in the process of receiving my citizenship card in the mail, so that's the last part that I'm waiting for after 10 years of paperwork assigning my pedigree to my family. So when I first started to get to know a little bit about my history, my great-grandmother, we had a picture of my great-grandmother in the house. Of course, it was black and white, and I didn't know anything about our history until my mom brought to my attention that we had the ability to join the Alberta Métis Association. So when we joined initially the Alberta Métis Association, we had to give them our information, our birth dates, where we were born, our family lines, and who we were related to. At first I was really concerned about this because this was not something normal that was to be discussed, because from my understanding growing up in my small town of Ponoka, we were not indigenous because clearly my skin is very white. So I had a hard time believing that I had any benefits, and I was a little worried about putting my name in for that information. But because it had to do with my great-grandmother, I gave it a chance and put that in. When I went away to university in 2012, this would have been subsequently about 5 or 6 years later, I was applying for my bachelor's major in political science, and at the university they asked me to identify whether or not I was First Nations, Inuit, or Métis. I said I had a Métis card, and they said, "Oh, so you identify as Métis?" And I said, "I guess so." And they said, "Okay, so you check this little box here, and would you be interested in taking a Aboriginal Studies class?" And I said, "Well, what does that do?" And they had explained to me very simply that you worked with the elders, you got to go and learn some ways of the land, you got to learn some cultural teachings, and it was kind of vague. And so I enrolled in the Indigenous Studies course to work with the elders, and yeah, it was very interesting because it taught me a lot more about myself, being in the Indigenous Studies class as well. It taught me about my family lineage, because to introduce yourself, one of the first things they teach you is to introduce yourself as your name, which is my traditional name, and I would say, "Hello, my name is Caleb. My traditional name is Hummingbird. I am the son of Bob and Shauna. Shauna is from my maternal side, is my Indigenous side. And from my mother's side, her parents are James Trahan and Noreen Lawrence. The Indigenous side on that side is through my through my Grandpa James. And Grandpa James's mom, she is my Indigenous side, and she's the great-grandmother that I went to go and find. So while I was in university, part of my first year study was to figure out where my Indigenous lineage came from, so I had to do a bit of research. Now, for Indigenous people, research for us is timely and difficult because we don't have a lot of documentation. A lot of our stories are oral. So the first story that I had heard was that my great-grandma's Indigenous name was Hightower, which I found out later was a nickname because she was very, very tall. It wasn't actually her Indigenous name. Another thing I found out about my great-grandma, her family came from Manitoba, covered wagon. Her father, Joseph Garrow, took the covered wagon from Manitoba to, from what I read, northern Saskatchewan, where, from what I read at the time, he was the deacon of the church during the Metis Rebellion. After the Metis Rebellion, where they Gatling gunned the church, the family then he moved his family to northern Alberta to High Prairie. In High Prairie, this is the last that I got any information on my great-great-grandfather Joseph Garrow, and I did not find just yet where he was buried up there, but my great-grandmother Josephine Garrow, who was his daughter, she was on that covered wagon, part of that trip to Potage, and when she was 12 years old, she was sold as a bride to a white man. And I literally found this out probably 2 or 3 years after I graduated. So one of the tricks with Indigenous stories is we find out information and then we have to dig, and then we have to talk to our family members and our elders to be able to piece the little bits of stories that we have together to see which ones are true. The most difficult part of that is the maybe stories that my grandpa had a headdress and we potentially were chiefs. There was another maybe story of how much land my great-grandpa and great-grandma had in Sundre, which was supposedly a township, which we don't know where any of that went to. And residential school was also a huge part of that, because we never knew anything about residential school until I went to university, because my papa always told me residential school was nothing but big, tall, mean nuns with meter sticks and ugly habits. Very interesting, very loaded question, my relationship with Canada. I am Canadian, 1000%. I am Scottish immigrant on my dad's side. I am German, Ukrainian, Russian immigrant on my dad's side. I am French, Irish on my mother's side, and I am also Saulteaux, Métis, Cree, indigenous, which means that I am what Canadians call a Heinz 57 mix of all the best pieces of Canadian. Métis people, my relationship with Canada, I would definitely have to say it is hugely through my Métis roots, because for Métis people, we are the interpreters. Métis people speak both French traditionally and Cree, or the localized language of the indigenous people, and they were always the people to go between the traders and the indigenous people to create healthy ties. And something that I have discovered about myself is I've always helped to create healthy ties within my family and my community. And as a Canadian citizen myself, this is my country for 4 generations, if not more. And I identify with Alberta because I've been there for such a long time, and my family's been there for 4 generations, and I identify with British Columbia because I've built my own education out here. Now, when it comes to understanding who I am as a Canadian, that is a very, very loaded gun. It's difficult as a Métis person who does not have traditional land to be able to know my traditional stories, to know where I come from, to know my traditional medicines. So I've had to patchwork my indigeneity together over the last 10 years inclusive, to include not only Métis practice, but Plains Cree from Ponoka, Alberta, from where I grew up, to include my adopted Heiltsuk family and their traditions, to learn about, the difference between drumming on a hand to drumming in a circle with 5 or 6 other people to drumming on a log with 12 other people of a giant cedar tree. Indigeneity is different for each location within Canada, within each province, within each community, and within each street guide. Every single one of us has a different language and a different way of knowing. And I have never learned about a more diverse culture of people than the Indigenous people, because there's not just one, which is amazing. And Canada didn't really teach me a whole lot about that growing up. Our education system, dating back obviously to the 1800s and pre-Nazi Germany, to help to indoctrinate people into the workforce. They teach you the great basics about, you know, what you need to do in order to graduate and go to post-secondary education and hopefully obtain a great job. They don't teach you a whole lot about tea. They don't teach you a whole lot about your heart, and they don't teach you a whole lot about your connection with spirit. And that is something that is sorely lacking from Indigenous teachings. Indigenous teachings as well taught me a lot about how the communities come together with healing one another, being able to let go of Canadian justice system. We send people away to jail. In many Indigenous communities, there's no such thing as jail, and there's not even a word for it. The person sits in the center of the community, and the community sits around them, and every single person says how their crime affected them. So it's community building each other up as opposed to segregation and splitting each other off. So I see such a tapestry mosaic within Canada of how indigeneity is introduced as well as still kind of pushed to the side because it doesn't have paperwork we can sign off on. So unfortunately, as we're moving into now the 21st, 22nd, and 23rd century, our Indigenous people are still without running water in most places, still without filtered water, still without electricity, and we live in the best country in the world, which I find very difficult that we can't take care of the people who have been here looking after all of that land for such a long time. So for obtaining your citizenship within the Métis community, there is a huge process. The first part of it is it starts off with a pedigree. We have different types of Indigenous people. So we have 1A, 2B, 3C. There's different fractions of Indigenous. And based upon that fraction of Indigenous, myself being a 16th, being the last fraction of Indigenous who is entitled to any sort of benefits, because that means that our blood has been thinned down from Indigenous blood down to whatever it is today. So we have to go all the way back and find the direct Indigenous tie in the family, who was my great-grandmother, Josephine Garrow, who was Saulteaux Cree from the Assiniboine region in Manitoba. I found that information out because my mom, my uncle Derek, my auntie Sheila, and I think my uncle Kevin all put in the information that they knew to join the Alberta Métis Association. So we had our pedigree already in the Alberta Association. So when I came to university in 2012, I was first approached about identifying simply, and then as I joined my Indigenous Studies classes over the next 4 years, I was approached by more elders who would ask, well, what language do you speak? And I said, I don't know. They said, which community you come from? I would say, I don't know. So I had to spend that 4 years really digging into my family's history and asking questions and taking any small leads. If it was like a Joseph Garrow or a Joe Garrow, I'd have to do a comparison between those stories. Now, in my first year of university, yes, we had to do a family study to go as far back in our lineage to introduce our family members to at least our great-grandparents, if not our great-great-grandparents. My dad's side was never really a problem with that, but because my mom's side, the white side of our family came from Ireland and the Indigenous side of our family was in Canada, the only information we were really able to find were public archives and documents, and we would have to stitch names together as we were doing that. So as I was creating the story of my great-grandma Josephine, over the years I've also had to take and omit some of those story pieces because I'm not sure which ones are factual that tie to my Josephine Garrow, because there could have been another Josephine Garrow that I am not aware of. of. Some of the information that has now come to light for myself as I'm getting closer to now having my citizenship card in plastic real form, which is whoopee. I don't really know how excited I'm supposed to be about that, but I am excited. It's been a lot of work. When it gets here, it'll prove anything. Anyway, it is a treasure chest. You literally take and open the lid of the internet, and they send you the MNBC, Métis Nation of British Columbia, will send you emails and newsletters and let you know what's happening within the community. Now that my paperwork is coming to fruition, it's wonderful because I do have the ability, I knew this in university, but I have the ability to apply for funding for my last year of schooling in a 5-year program where they will cover part of my education, as long as it's insofar tied to the Métis indigenous community and benefiting as such. They will also, from what I've read, there are bursaries for starting business, something that I'm looking into for myself because I've worked here at the Artful Hand now for 3 years, and this is my retirement job, and I love what I do, working with 80 local artisans, as well as the metaphysical talent, and the indigenous elders in the community, as well as anybody from the Silks Nation. I absolutely love when any of the local people come in and share their knowledge, because again, that's another treasure chest of new information that's available to me here in the Okanagan. One of the parts of that that's so beautiful is that as I get to know more about the community and I get to identify more as a Métis person myself, that's the treasure chest is just, it's beautiful because it's everything from not just the benefits that you can apply for to have bursaries to go towards your business, especially if you're supporting other elders, other Métis artisans, other children coming out of school. But also in that treasure chest is being able to learn localized knowledge. So that's to do with areas where you can choose to pick your medicines, or for instance, close by to us is Osoyoos and has lakes of many colors. And that's indigenous knowledge because each of those lakes, and if you are with a local person, they will take you down and explain what each of the lakes does for healing properties, and they will take you down and do that stuff. But you have to know how to ask the right questions and who to talk to. People don't just talk about it. You have to ask to get those questions answered. Okay, for people that are different, we always know we're a little different ever since we're little kids. And ever since I was little, I've had visitors wake me up in the middle of the night or sit on my bed, night terrors that would terrify me, and my mom would always talk me through them as if they were no big deal. And I never really understood that as a kid until I got a little bit older, and I understood that dreams and those types of interpretations of being tuned in and tapped on are a huge part of our indigenous culture. And growing up in the town that I did in Ponoka, Alberta, it's famous for its mental hospital since 1912 or 1914. So growing up in that town for 4 generations, it is common knowledge that you don't bring up that voices are talking to you and things are sitting on your bed because and there's nobody there, because in a town like that, this is where medication and being thrown in a padded room comes from 1914 up to probably 1989. 1992 was the closing of the last residential school, which is unfortunate because I found out that one of those residential schools was in Hobima, which is now Musquechies, which was right by the town I grew up in, and I didn't know that until I went to university. Now, being tuned in and tapped on means that if you feel something is wrong in the universe and you can't explain why, but energy just feels funny when you walk in somewhere and you have to immediately turn and leave, it means that you feel that there's something in the atomic structure of the universe that's not vibrating, that meets with you. And because you are an atomic being, everything vibrates at a certain frequency. So if this is something that is new knowledge to you, it's going to feel really trippy when you think that when our energy dies and leaves our body, that's it. It goes nowhere. But we lose, 2.5 grams when we pass away, which is essentially your spirit leaving your body. These spirits have a method of being out there. We don't just disappear. I've never felt like we just disappear. I've always talked to imaginary friends since I was a little kid, and it was just something that we did back then. We didn't have social media to hold ourselves accountable for saying silly things or for picking on our friends or to be able to be like, hey, this thing actually happened. We just had to take things at face value. And so as an Indigenous person, one of those things at face value is being a storyteller and being able to tell stories. And those stories, as they go through time, yes, they do definitely evolve. But one of the things that you have to consider is the more times that you tell a story and you tell the story the same way and it doesn't change every single time you tell that story, if you think that person's lying because they've told that story so many times that now they're at the point they believe it, you need to go and experience that kind of thing for yourself. If you've never been there, you've never had that, and you've never opened up to that, it is really hard to explain. It's like closing your eyes and trying to walk down a hallway and telling you to shake hands with every person you walk past. Are you going to be able to do that? Because if you can't, you should probably stop listening right now and then come back when you've taken a little bit of time to get to know yourself. Because with Indigenous people and getting to know the true nature of why we vibrate, is to ask yourself, why do you vibrate? Why are you here? Why are you living? What's the purpose of all of this, and why do all of these crystals and rocks exist? Why does this planet exist, and why does this universe exist? Simply put, it's here for you to experience it. And every single thing that you have always had in your life, whether the people have passed away or left you, their energies stick with you. They become you, and every part of you is a part of them. So this is something that you learn as you move forward, and you have to understand that you are not the only way of knowing in the universe. And it's so broad that you really should just open your eyes, close your ears, and hold the hand of somebody next to you that you've never met, because they will tell you some amazing things about their lives that you didn't realize about your own. Thoughts on love. Wow. Took a philosophy course to actually study this in depth. Not only did I take philosophy courses on this, but I also took and paired this with my Indigenous Studies course, with my English studies, with my political science, and hours and hours and hours of Socrates and Plato. Love. How do I feel about it? Love is, as an Indigenous person, it's so abundant. It is something that it starts inside of you and it works its way out into the rest of the universe, because the universe already loves you, and that's why you're here. When it comes to love, is such a huge tapestry. It's a big, giant, beautiful tapestry, and you have to hone in on the specific things that you're talking about. So if you're talking about relationships with people, you can love every single person you're in a relationship. You don't have to physically love the person, but every single person is a piece of love that's brought into your life that you're supposed to be able to understand better. Love also goes into things. Not the love of, I love these rings because I bought them. No, that's superficial love. It's about the things that just exist. There's trees that grow because they love you, because they're here, and you can hug them and they don't want anything back. Those trees will love you just because. These crystals will love you because they grow in the universe, and you can love them back because they're there existing. Love doesn't have to be something that is returned to you in order to feel love, in my opinion. And when it comes to the opinions of love, well, everybody's got their own on it. So it's okay to have differences of opinion in love, because if you don't look at love in a whole bunch of different colors, you are going to miss the most important aspect of love of all. And that is something I can't tell you. You're gonna have to figure it out. My Metis Citizenship. Wow. What a loaded gun. This is something I've really put some thought into over the last 10 years, because studying political science and having to study World War I, World War II, what happened in Germany and in Europe at that time, and what was simultaneously happening here in Canada. For me, if I'm being honest, identifying as a Métis or an Indigenous person is terrifying for me. It is not something, when I first started talking about it, that I was proud to mention. It was something that I was made fun of because I'm very visibly white with my blue eyes and my fair skin. And I really questioned why they needed to know so much information about our pedigree, and I felt that being called a pedigree initially was really detrimental to my mental health, because yes, Caleb, as my name translates into English to Hebrew, does mean dog. I never once felt like a dog until I was told to identify as an Indigenous person. After identifying as an Indigenous person, as a Métis, I had a really difficult time in university being a white Indigenous student. I worked as the Aboriginal student liaison on the Students' Union, which some people had commented that it was a grandfathered position because I was the next closest thing to having an Indigenous person in the office, so they literally just handed me the title, is what I heard from people. I had 2 other Indigenous people who held the seat prior to me leave and say nothing, and this is why I had obtained those seats. The first time was because of acclamation. I was gifted it because there was nobody else to fill the seat, and we didn't have an Indigenous person in our Students' Union to fill the seat at that time. And then after I had finished my Directors at Large position, I did put myself forward to campaign for that position, and I did actually get it through Campaign Through University. As for the love of what I feel for where I come from, it's something I've had to build upon for myself. Knowing that I'm an Indigenous person to Canada is now something that I can be proud of 10 years later. Take us back 15 to 20 years ago when I was in my early 20s, and being an Indigenous person in my hometown was not something to be proud of. It was something to be made fun of, and not just by my friends, but by my family members. And that made things really difficult because it almost gives you shame to take pride in wearing your feathers, or in learning some of your language, or learning how to greet people. When I was in Nanaimo, I was taught the local greeting for the Coast Salish people. Aidsquail, Iconasilam Nama, Inta, Kwakamda, Tanitsanuk, Red Deer, Alberta, Tanitsanuk, Snanemoch, Tanitsanuk now, Kelowna, which is a way of greeting the territory and welcoming everybody and introducing yourself. And I got to learn a little bit about this, but coming from Alberta, being Cree and being on the Cowichan tribe or the Snuneymuxw tribe, I'm not learning my traditional language. So like I keep saying, it's a patchwork of information that comes together of indigeneity. And I'm not just one Indigenous person, but I am a conglomerate of, I think this is the part that I love the most about myself, is the names that I have received from each of my nations, whether it be Cree as Amapahisis, or the Cowichan tribe as Swansili, or the Heiltsuk Nation as Kwakamda. Each of those comes with their own stories, and I'm so fortunate that I've got to fall in love with myself in different languages that I don't even understand yet. And this one was from my university, from Coast Salish territory in Nanaimo, and I gifted this copper bracelet to my gran, and she wore it every year that I was in university until she passed away, and then I got it after she passed away. She wore it until the moment she passed. This one here, this is actually, sorry to finish This is my name. These are the two hummingbirds here. So this is Kwakanda. This one here comes from the Celtic territory in Bella Bella. And this, I believe, is killer whale, and it was hand carved by a local artisan from there and sent to me by my adopted family. Beautiful hand carved art. I absolutely love coastal Coast Salish art. And then the last piece is this really beautiful hand carved cross that has two eagles and Raven the trickster on the top. And this one also comes from Bella Bella, from my adopted family in Celtic territory.